In fact, I'm pleased to be a part of this webinar. Thanks a lot, sir, for organizing this. I'll just share the slides. Please let me know if it's...
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Right. Thank you. Okay. Very good morning to one and all. The next few minutes, I'll just try to give a brief overview about the cyber crimes and the cyber law framework of our country. So since it's a very vast topic, I'll keep limited to the most important aspects of the issue. So just a second, I'll just manage the slideshow.
Hello, Vansati.
Yes, sir. So probably ma'am is not audible. Sir, can you hear ma'am? Sir, please unmute yourself, principal sir.
Ma'am is not audible.
Try. Am
Yes,
I
ma'am.
audible?
Ma'am, now it's audible. Now it's very audible, ma'am.
Sorry. So I'll just repeat briefly. So today we're talking about an area that's of relevance to most of us, since we're talking about crimes that are committed on cyberspace or with the use of cyber technology. And this is one technology which is handy to all of us. Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am. You're very audible, ma'am.
Yeah. So we're talking about a technology which is something that can be accessible to any. The reason is because this has given a lot of advantages to governmental transactions, commercial transactions, or this has also turned out to be one of the mode of communication. So it's been of extreme importance to economy, to governance activities, to each of us. On the other hand, this has also been advantageous to the perpetrators of crime. So they've started using cyber technology as a platform to commit criminal activities, and that is the concern. So the law enforcement agency hence are facing a lot of challenges due to the way in which this technology has been used for commission of crime. Now it gets more complicated because the victim of this particular crime can be any. It's extremely hard to profile a victim because it can be just anyone who's using the electronic device with or without internet connection. General assumption is if I'm not using internet, I may not become the victim, but that's a very invalid assumption, because sometimes our data is in the hands of someone and I may not even be using internet to become a victim of that stolen data. For example, our Aadhaar card details, if are in the wrong hands, I don't have to be an internet user to become a victim of a form of cybercrime. So therefore, it's extremely hard to profile a victim. Victim can be an institution, an individual, or can also be the government agency in itself. At the same time, the accused profile is also something which is very, very hard to categorize as. So it need not just be an educated person who can end up committing cybercrime. It can also be any who just knows how to use the technology. Right? So there are like a lot of incidences where uneducated people have been caught committing crimes, if not like extremely technical in nature, at least of sending abusive contents. So you can't like profile the accused. As I said, victim can also be any. We've had incidences of certain institutions becoming victims. For example, airlines, there were certain incidences when tickets were sold by the employees to fictitious people by using computer data, etc. They could easily manipulate the records. So an example of how institution can become a victim Individual can also become victim because we keep hearing about how like somebody got duped with financial loss because of some online financial fraud or job scams. Right? So any individual can be a victim. State is also not spared because often the hackers are today behind the extremely secured and confidential data. We've had a lot of incidences when states were made victims of, state agencies were made victims of cybercrimes. Example, post-Cochrane test, we've seen how Baba Atomic Research Centers systems were under cyber attacks and there were attempts made to pull down a lot of confidential data. Not just that, so even after Pulwama attack, we've seen how there were a lot of reports indicating how like there were attempts to hack our systems. And at the same time, we also hear counter allegations from the other countries saying there's been attempts of cyber attacks from India. So these kind of allegations continue to indicate the fact that even states can't be spared and it's not just institutions or individuals who are at loss. Another added challenge has been because of the increase in the number of online financial frauds. If you look at the extent of loss that one suffers, it's extremely huge. Few years back, in UK, an academic institution along with a government agency conducted a study and they just estimated the extent of loss the business enterprises, government agencies and individuals were facing. And if you look at the statistics, it's quite an alarming statistics that are indicated. And taken together, it indicates a huge loss to the entire economy. The same is also the plight when it comes to other countries, including India. The same report also said that India was the fifth country at that point of time to having been losing economically because of online financial frauds. Now, this is a report that came almost around 10 years back and continues to be the same even today. The situation is almost the same even today. So on one hand, you have alarmed number of cases increasing, while on the other hand, the number of cases that we've been successfully investigating, successfully prosecuting are extremely less. In some states, they're just in single number. I'm talking about the cases of convictions we've got under cyber laws. So it's been extremely a bad scenario. This is also because of a lot of challenges that lies within the system as well as within the laws. We'll try to see like how the law is framed. So today, therefore, we're talking about a crime that can affect any of us, from an offender who can be in any part of the world and who can make use or or can misuse the anonymity and the privacy that he gets from the technology. Coming to the law framework, none of the provisions in Indian law define the term cybercrime. However, it indicates that these are set of those crimes which are committed by using cyber technology either as a tool or as a target, or this refers to the crimes which are committed on cyberspace. So wherein I use a computer as a tool to commit an offense, it's referred to as cybercrime. Or I'm attacking your computer and my target is to steal the data from your computer. Or I just go on a social media, defame a person. So social media is a place where I commit the offense. So this can be one of the simplest definition that can be assigned to the term. Like how IPC classifies crimes into various categories: offenses against human body, against property, against state. Similarly, writers have classified cybercrimes into cybercrimes against person, property, state. So depending upon the nature of crime being committed, it can be classified under any of these heads. A very quick look at some forms of cybercrimes. Cybercrimes are not necessarily always those new forms of crimes that have emerged with the technology. So today we don't talk about hacking, phishing, data diddling, data destruction, malware attacks, that is virus attacks, worm attacks. They've all come with the technology. They've all emerged quite recently in the society. But the fact that certain conventional crimes are also now more easily getting committed because of cyber technology cannot be disproved. So therefore, when we talk about cybercrime, we need to address both conventional crimes, which have now been, been committed with the use of technology, at the same time, newly formed crimes. So this includes frauds, which have today taken form of online frauds, forgery, which have taken form of digital forgery. Counterfeitation today includes counterfeitation of documents with the use of scanning devices, printer devices. For example, immediately after demonetization, we've seen from the media reports how within few hours they could come up with fake currency notes. So is the technologies ease that it provides for wrongdoers. Defamation today has taken form of cyber defamation. I don't have to publish a defamatory article in a pamphlet or in a book or in a paper, that is in a newspaper. I can just do it on social media or through WhatsApp message. So And then this also includes other offenses which were conventional in nature at one point of time, like online harassment. So today, Workplace Harassment Act, which protects the women against workplace harassment, also takes note of online harassment to which a woman can be subjected, like as a victim. Intimidation can be committed by using cyber technology. So, why are people using this technology to commit the crime? I'm sure we all are aware of the fact that this technology has been extremely useful to wrongdoers. Why? Because the very preparation of committing crime is easier today. Now, people who have done your IPC criminal law classes might know that crime is usually classified into 4 stages: intention, preparation, attempt, and commission. So the preparation, earlier I had to do it in in the actual world, which was a little difficult. I might have left the trace while preparing and all. But today, preparation of crime is easier because you get every information, everything that I require to commit crime is available online. And today we're talking about dark web, where almost most of the illegal activities are very easily committed. So preparation to commit the crime is easier. I don't have to meet conspirators in physical world to conspire. That is design my act of criminal activity. I can do it by meeting people on the online platform. So I can use a lot of technology with which I can hide my conversation, online conversation. And I don't need many people to come, dear friends. If you remember, when Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, there were lots of people who were involved in this terror attack. While on the other hand, if you compare it with 2008 Mumbai terror attack, it was just few people who entered the country and committed the terror attack, which resulted in deaths of many people as well as injury to many and destruction of property. Why? Because it was just few people who were taking the help of the technology. So there are investigation reports indicating how they had used satellite phones, SIM cards and all. So therefore, technology has started, in fact, like replacing individuals. And also the offender gets to use that invisibility he gets. For example, sometimes the police might end up investigating the case, but that investigation only ends in detecting the device. But who is using that device at that point of time while committing the crime is still another challenging issue that they'll have to find out. So the technology has made the task of investigation extremely complicated. So that's in fact the concern for the law enforcement agency. Who is the offender? The one who commits the cybercrime can be any. So initially they were saying it can be people in adults, etc. But as I said in the beginning, now it's not completely true. The offender can be any or every, irrespective of the age or educational background, etc. And at times, the investigations have revealed that the offenders can also be those who belong to organized groups. So it's an organized crime that at times needs to be investigated. Sometimes, if it's an offense committed in an institution, it might have been committed because of certain employees from within the institution. And many times we've noticed offender is somebody who's known to the victim. Example, stalking or say online cheating, especially where women or children are victims, sometimes it gets related to. The investigation indicates that it's been committed by somebody known to the victim. So that these are all special features that cybercrime comes up with. Coming to the law framework, it was in the year 2000, the government of India came up with the Law Information Technology Act to address the concerns which were at that point of time emerging because of advancement of cyber technology. So the law, however, aimed at regulating e-commerce or e-governance, so let's focus on regulating crime. So you have provisions saying we recognize e-contracts, we recognize digital signatures, but it wasn't much about regulating crimes. So this was the law that came out in 2008. We had to amend the law, but before the enactment came, parallelly we also made certain changes. Certain amendments were brought into other laws, including evidence law, Indian Penal Code, Bankers Book Evidence Act. To an extent, these amendments are noteworthy because, for example, because of this amendment, it can cover electronic document-based crimes even under IPC. Electronic documents can be used as documentary evidence under evidence law, subject to certain conditions. Right. Now, in the year 2008, because of Mumbai terror attack, we realized how the technology has turned out to be extremely dangerous. So it was felt that there was a need felt to regulate the abuse of technology. So therefore, in 2008, we amended the IT Act. So I'll just now tell about in a summarized form. I just tell about the 5th important provisions in the Information Technology Act. Is the screen visible now?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
So let's look at the provisions. So these are the most important provisions under which we can regulate.
Yeah, bag এটা আছিলে মোৰ হে ব্যাগটো কি হ'ল মই
Participants.
এ নহয় ও মোৰ এনেকে ভৰাব পৰা পকাৰ তেনেকে লগাই থব
Sorry.
পৰা ধুনীয়া বেগ এটা আছিলে
Sorry, ma'am, to interrupt in between. Ma'am, I'll again mute all the participants. You again unmute yourself, ma'am. I'll mute all the participants.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Okay, so we are now referring to the most important part of the discussion. So that's about the sections under which crimes can be regulated. Let's have a look at the sections. Section 65, it's chapter 11 of the IT Act, which regulates cyber crimes. And it starts with section 65, which says tampering with any computer source code or deleting, destroying, altering any computer source code is a crime. What are computer source codes? Computer source codes are the codes through which you communicate with the computer. These are the languages through which you communicate with the computer. So if anyone, without the permission of the owner of that computer system or the computer source code, manipulates, deletes, destroys any computer source code, he can be booked under this section. For example, if you remember, at one point of time, we had restrictions on using some companies' mobile phones for another company's internet service. For example, Reliance device, you could only use it for Reliance service. So, or only Tata Indicom's device, you could only use it for Tata Indicom's their telephone service. So what people would do, they would break the code and get it enabled with another service provider. So things like that could fall under 65. Then we have 66, which says any offense which falls under 43, which is actually a civil liability imposing provision. Now 43 is a section under which you can file a civil case, and the same civil wrongs will become criminal offenses if it is committed with fraudulent or dishonest intention. So what does that mean? So let's briefly go through 43. 43 says that any person, if commits an offense of hacking, that is accessing computers, computer systems, or if steals data. So I steal some files from your computer or from your pen drive, from your CD. So that'll also come under 43. Or I steal your internet service. That is, you have internet service, but I steal it by logging into your Wi-Fi connection. So anything like this, or like destroying the data. So I delete the files from your computer. Or I do anything with which the value of the information you have on the system gets affected. That is, I steal your password, and or I get access to your password and it loses its validity. So all of this falls under 43, and you can file a civil case. And if the same offense is committed with a fraudulent or a dishonest intention, one can file a criminal case under section 66. And then we have 66A. However, the section is removed because the section said sending any messages or any communication either through phone or computer, email, etc., which has annoying content or menacing character in it, or if your message caused any injury to another, intimidation to another, insult to another. So of recently, because of COVID, we've been reading or coming across a lot of posts which are at times annoying, right? For example, certain videos showing how somebody spreading COVID-19. So just to create that panic in the people, or just showing like wrong reports of COVID affected people, etc. So that you create alarm. So those kind of things could be removed under 66A, because 66A said sending any such message is a crime. And it was criminalized, and it was made a cognizable offense, meaning that by the police could arrest the accused. By filing an FIR, they could also initiate investigation. This section led to a lot of illegal arrests across the country. Illegal in the sense, it was an indication of abuse of power by the authorities. If you remember, in Mumbai, 2 girls were arrested for a post that was written on Facebook in relation to the death of a political leader there. So like this series of arrests were happening across the country, and that's when a law student approached Supreme Court of India and filed a PIL asking for declaration of 66A's unconstitutional provision. The Supreme Court declared it to be so, and now we've struck down the provision. So 66A no more exists. You have 66B, which says if anyone receives or retains any stolen computer system, or communication device, in the sense, if I buy a laptop which is a stolen laptop, or I buy a mobile phone which is a stolen mobile phone, I can be booked under 66B. But you have to prove that I have the mens here, either knowingly I'm buying it or knowingly I'm retaining it. While buying, maybe I didn't know. Then I get to know it's a stolen mobile phone, so I can be booked under 66B. It also includes stolen computer resource. So stolen computer resource would also mean software programs which are pirated versions. So today, if I buy a pirated CD, I can be booked under 66B. Right? So that's 66B. You have 66C, which is a very commonly utilized provision. It says, if a person steals the identity of another person on cyberspace, for example, I make use of your name or your surname, your name, your surname, your date of birth, a combination of all this, and create a fake profile on Facebook. So I can be booked under 66C for stealing your identity. Or another example, I send an email to your friend in your name. So I'm stealing your identity. Your friend reads the email and gets cheated. So then 66D will apply, because 66D is about cheating by impersonation. I'm impersonating you, and another person gets cheated because of that. So he uses some, for example, I sent an email saying, I've lost money at Fame. So if this email is sent in the name of your friend, you tend to believe it and you send money. So then I can be booked under 66D. 66D is about voyeurism. That is taking photographs or video recordings of private parts of your person. So that comes under 66B along with IPC's provisions, of course. 66L, which is about cyber terrorism, which uses technology to commit offenses like creating terror in the minds of people. But for the people, most of you are from North India, you would have probably heard or at least read about this incident that had happened in South India a few years back. In Bangalore, it started with, and then it spread to other parts as well. So there was a WhatsApp message which got circulated saying that all the people who are in Bangalore come to Bangalore. It is obviously thing, otherwise you will attack. This created a lot of terror right? So that's when they had to introduce extra trains, etc., to bring down the chaos that was created. So this is an example of cyber terrorism. Then you have 67 and 67A, which is about adult pornography, that is publishing or transmitting any porn or obscene contents online. 67B is about child pornography, which is a case where children's contents are used for creating obscene or porn contents. So 84B is about abetment, 84C is about attempt. Since we're all from law background, I wouldn't go into the details of this. There are a lot of provisions under which, in one way or the other, almost every form of cybercrime can be dealt with. Now, there might be questions about like privacy protection, data protection. So how do we protect data as of now? We have certain provisions under which civil cases can be filed or civil liability can be imposed. And that includes sections like 43. I've already explained the summary of this section, which is actually nothing but a criminalized version, which we see under section 66. So I'll not go back to 43. So these are the sections, like this is one section under which most of the forms of cyber crimes can be covered in one way or the other, because the wordings are so wide that they're comprehensive enough to deal with almost every form of cyber crime. Later, maybe during question and answer, if there are specific questions, I'll see like how it can be related to 43. Otherwise, you have another important provision, and that's 43A. 43A says, if a person or an institution is collecting or storing or transmitting any personally identifiable information of another person. Now, what is personally identifiable information? Any information with which, or any information which partly is available with me, and partly if there are other information togetherly taken, they're enough to identify you. Example, your name, not enough, because hundreds of people may share your name, but your name with your surname and with your PAN number, or your name with your WhatsApp number is enough to identify you, right? So therefore your WhatsApp number or anything with which you can be identified, a natural person can be identified, are called as personal information. So any person who is collecting, storing, possessing personal information, if he is negligent in taking care of its security, and then there is data leakage, in the sense there is breach of data, so then that person, that institution, that company is liable to pay compensation. So this is 43A. So it is wrong when people say that India never had a personal data protection law. We are waiting to have it. No, it's wrong, because you have 43 and 43A, with which you can still protect personal data as well as other forms of non-personal data. So that's about the law. Now there's another section which is about protected system. So any computers which are used to store critical infrastructure, like for example, I've computerized the entire electricity supply to a city, and there is a terror attack on that computer. So then I'll be booked not just under cyber terrorism provision, but I'll also be booked under section 70, because section 70 says that any computers which are used for critical infrastructure can be declared as protected computers, in which case attacks on that, hacking on that will all be dealt with in a more serious manner compared to hacking of a normal computer, right? So that's the law framework. What is the limitation? I'll just give some examples to show how the law is limited. This is an incident of, these kind of incidences we keep coming across often. This is an incident that unfortunately took place in Bangalore, when the state assembly was going on. So there were a couple of ministers who were found like watching porn content on the mobile phone. Now, could this be bought under IT Act was the question. Maybe they can be bought under the assembly rules, codes of ethics, etc. But to bring them under IT Act is difficult, because what's criminalized under IT Act is publication or transmission. As long as I'm just watching it, the law is very clear that this is not criminalized at this point of time. Right? So that's about the issue with regard to pornography. Another concern is, now what if I have a website and another person is misusing my website? Can I be held liable? Now this issue was sorted out to an extent by the court in both Shreya Singhal case as well as Amnish Bajaj case. Now this is a case where child porn contents were uploaded on a website by two children from a school. So then the question was whether CEO could be punished or not. Initially, the CEO was arrested, bail was rejected by the courts in Delhi, including Delhi High Court. But later, when the matter goes to the court, there's a quashing petition that went on an appeal to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court says that in this case, they can't be held liable because officers of the company can't be held liable because you've not named the company in the charge. Or when you not charge the company, an officer on behalf of the company also cannot be liable. If you notice, in this case, because of a procedural flaw, they couldn't convict the accused. But otherwise, the substantive law is wide enough to include even officers in some cases. So now the question is, to what extent the internet service providers or company heads can be held liable? Now, as long as I'm able to show as an officer, director, manager, head of the department that I have not been negligent, I have taken due care and caution. And despite that, there is a criminal activity that took place on my internet service platform. And this criminal activity was without any knowledge of mine. I didn't know about it. I was careful. Despite that, criminal activity took place. So that's when I can be exempted from committing the offense. Right? So that's the law, like it tries to balance the interest of both intermediaries as well as the public at large. So to in fact like further substantiate this, today you have intermediary guidelines, which is currently undergoing changes. We have to wait and see when the changes will come up. And these guidelines very clearly say when and to what extent intermediaries can be liable. Similar to this, we also have cybercafe regulations, which imposes a lot of duties upon cybercafe owners who are running cybercafes. Now, what is cybercafe? Cybercafe is not just what we see around in form of those cubicle, form of a setup where they allow you to use internet service. The definition of cybercafe is wide enough to include any place or any institution or person who gives internet service to you for commercial, in relation to commercial activity. So for example, if you go to a restaurant and then if you get internet access, that restaurant is also something that falls under the definition of cybercafe. So they're also required to follow certain requirements. Almost all the offenses I so far explained are cognizable in nature. The reason is all of these are punishable with imprisonment up to 3 years. So therefore they're cognizable in nature, which means the police ideally should be investigating this case by filing an FIR at the initial stage of the investigation. On the other hand, almost all the offenses punishable with imprisonment up to 3 years and not more than 3 years are made available, in the sense you can get the bail in the station itself or otherwise by the court. And then almost all the offences are compoundable in nature unless they are the offences committed against a woman or a child or the state. Where do you file the civil case is the question. You want to file a civil case under 43, 43A, you'll have to file the complaint before the adjudicating authority of your state. Now, the adjudicating authority is an IS rank officer who is the secretary to the Department of IT. So, to go there and file this. If at all you're asking for damages of less than 5 crores, damages of more than 5 crores, you have to see your state's civil court's jurisdiction and accordingly ascertain the jurisdiction. So that's about the civil and criminal case procedure. The challenges are still immense because we're talking about the technology which is so fast that many times it falls behind the legal issues that can be resolved as per the current law framework. In a sense, we keep amending law like once in a few years and all, but there's a lot of changes that the technology undergoes. So sometimes you see a mismatch between the two. When we are still framing cyber laws, we're also hearing about, on the other hand, the clouds, the artificial intelligence, the drones, the robotics, etc. Right? So fast is the technologies changes. So that's one challenge. The other challenge has been of the jurisdiction. What if the accused is not from India or is from A country using computer belonging to C country and then causing loss to victims sitting in C country? You have 3 or more than 3 countries at a time who are involved in committing the crime or associated with the crime. So that raises challenges of jurisdiction. Similarly, evidentiary issues. Now, this is not a crime where you can see a revolver, you can see a knife and confiscate it. Over here, we're talking about data which is actually not visible at times to the eyes, especially metadata and all that. So there's a lot of input that we require from the forensic domain. So cyber forensics needs to be integrated with the correct legal approach. So otherwise it will be difficult, and we've seen how courts are also struggling to provide admissibility to the evidences. So this way, there are many other challenges that are affecting the law framework. So what I would want to conclude with is that we have a very wider law, extremely comprehensive, extremely well worded, so that you can bring under its ambit any form of cybercrime. Even though on one hand I said there's a fast changing technology, but the way we worded the terms in sections like 43 and 66 are so wide that you can include even new forms of crimes that are emerging in society. The problem is of effective implementation. Here we're talking about a procedural law which is almost outdated so as to suit this particular new form of cyber crimes. So if there are any questions, we can pick up. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your wonderful explanation on the topic. I'm sure your excellent presentation has benefited all our participants. Thank you so much, ma'am. Now we'll move on to the question answer session. So I would now like to request my co-host, Ms. Joba Ratna Thakur, to continue with the session. Over to you, Joba.
Thank you, Bhaswati ma'am. I would now like to move on to the interactive session of today's webinar. The platform is now open to all the participants to raise any relevant questions, if any, pertaining to today's topic. We have amongst us our valued participant, Dr. Rupali Devabarman ma'am, Assistant Professor, Department of Law, Guwahati University. May I invite you, ma'am, to put forward your questions, if any, to our learned resource person.
Yeah, there's one question I can read in the chat. It says, how can we prevent cybercrime like hacking? Right, so that's beyond the law framework, but I just try to answer in the simplest form as possible. So, when we use cyber technology, of course, we'll have to be very, very careful on how we use the technology, to what extent. So there are like many ways in which hacking takes place. So one is maybe because I would have myself compromised my confidential information somewhere. Example, maybe I've gone to a restaurant and while giving feedback, I've given my, credentials. So, that helps them to get access to my, systems. Or if at all it's your bank related details, they can access your bank accounts. So things like this. So one is like not taking care of our confidential information is one issue. Secondly, we should avoid clicking on any or every kind of content that comes online. The cookies or like just enabling cookies when it's not necessary. or just like clicking on attachments without verifying who has sent it, what it is all about. And this is how usually ransomware attacks takes place. So, maybe it is convincing because it would have come in the name of somebody you trust with. But then still we should still be careful when we download something, an attachment, or click on a link, etc. So there are many ways through which hacking can take place. Okay, so depending on like where a compromise with the security, there might have been some windows that have been left open for them to gain entry into my system. Sometimes it just need not be because of my negligence. So let's assume I'm just sharing a network. One of my colleague has been negligent. So I can also be one of the victim who can get attacked. So this is how usually companies are getting affected. One of the employee has not been careful. Through him, they can get access to the company's network or company's co-employees, network, their systems, etc. So best is make a very careful choice on what you're watching, what you're downloading, and what what links you're clicking on. Secondly, avoid sharing confidential information unless it's necessary. Thirdly, make a segregation of device. The one on which you do like financial transaction should not be the one on which you would be downloading freely available video games or movies, etc. So segregate the devices. Another most common, important suggestion for a common person is if you have a salaried account, keep that different from the account from where you make online purchases, right? So even if there is, despite all this carefulness, even if there is a risk that I'm going to face, so the extent of loss is less.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, now I would like to take a few questions from our participants who've posted in the chat box. The first question is from Arista Priyadarshini. She says, ma'am, as you said, jurisdiction has become an issue regarding cybercrime. Kindly throw some light on the same. Ma'am, that's
jurisdiction. Yeah, as I said, see, one crime, even since beginning, jurisdiction was always a challenge when more than one place was considered to be the place of jurisdiction or was involved in a criminal activity with that. But now it's more a challenge because this is about a crime that I can commit sitting in Bangalore and hacking a system that you have in, say, let's assume in Assam, right? So I can hack your system from there, and then from that system I can commit financial fraud and some person say Mumbai. So of course, factually, it's a reality that jurisdiction becomes a challenge. Legally, there are remedies, though I don't say these are remedies, but you have legal provisions that can have some cases. So CRPC talks about collecting evidence from another, not a place of jurisdiction. So especially if it is from outside the country, so you can, go and collect the evidence from them, ask them to send the evidence by following a procedure called MLAT process. So that is Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty. If at all we have with that particular country, then you can seek for the cooperation of that country and collect the evidence from that country. So this is like a legally provided procedure, which is time consuming, complicated, and at times you don't get permission to do this because the channel that is indicated is too complicated even to process this request. Suppose I'm investigating a case at Guwahati. So you have to, that investigating officer should request the local magistrate, and then through local magistrate, the request goes to Minister of Home Affairs, then to CBI's unit. From there, it goes to Minister of External Affairs, etc. From there, it goes to another country. So it's a very complicated process, right? So legally, you have a remedy, but factually, it is of no use. But at the same time, today we're also talking about a system where through email communication, you can receive email. I mean, the evidence is from another country, but this requires the coordination of that other institution of another country, of another, legal agency. There are legal remedies, but factually it is extremely difficult to use them.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, I'll make an announcement. Kindly mute your mics. All the participants are requested to kindly mute their mics as it disturbs the entire session. Thank you. The next question is from Bhashwati Shivam. Ma'am, what are the preferred jobs for the prevention of cybercrime?
Preferred jobs? Is it jobs? Can you repeat the
I
question?
think there's some mistake in there. Ma'am, should we
No,
go to the
it's
next
okay. That
question
is the
then?
question I can say. See, one is we might have some participants here who are showing interest yesterday who work in the digital forensics domain. So one is those forensic examinations. It's not like, as I said, it's not an evidence like knife or a revolver. It's all about that digital data, etc. How to collect it from computers, from clouds, from servers, etc. So you need that technical skill and expertise. Right? And then that comes with a lot of safeguards. You need to follow digital forensic procedure and all. So one profession that has emerged, in this particular area, which is of extreme importance, has been that of cyber forensic experts. So we need some technical knowledge of that. The other thing that's very, very relevant for the participants here is to take up the task of practicing in this particular domain. Across the country, we hardly have few lawyers who made their name in cyber law domain. It's very few because here we're talking about techno-legal issue, right? So you might know CRPC, you might try to understand ITR, but you should also to an extent understand the technicalities, what a server is, how does that function, what digital evidence is, how do you retract it, I mean, how do you collect it, how do you then, what are the grounds on which you are able to retract those evidence. So you need those lawyers also to get into the field, get expertise. And in US, in fact, most of the lawyers who do this practicing in cyber law field, they take on cyber forensic training themselves, at least the basics, so that I know what I'm presenting as evidence before the court. So what we require is the combination of this techno-legal domain expertise. So therefore, lawyers in this particular area definitely will be successful because this field is still emerging in India. The third category can be you can just be a consultant. So a lot of companies get stuck with cyber policies, compliance. They may have very good IT experts in their departments and all, but they'll not know how to show compliance to the law, especially now that personal data protection law is going to come. So there is a lot of expectation from the industry side to show compliance. And they have started hiring people who are from law background and who are able to give their consultations on privacy policies, cyber security policies, etc. So therefore, there's a lot of need when it comes to the job seekers in this particular domain. It can be for individual as a consultant or to be recruited in the corporates as cyber law experts or privacy professionals. Another domain that's coming up very fast in our country, and then as cyber forensic experts, etc.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, we'll take a few more questions since there's limited time. So there's another question by Nashrat Masjid, Chinmay Chakravarti, that ma'am, in Assam, we have very poor system to counter the cyber crimes. Our police also do not have proper knowledge to handle it. So please give suggestions.
Okay, see, this is a challenge almost every country is facing. As I said, one reason is because we're talking about a technology that's so fastly changing that whatever extent is the knowledge that you provide to the police in form of training may not be enough. So it is a continuous process of learning that's expected from the law enforcement agencies, especially investigating and prosecuting officers. So it's not just a concern for Assam, it's a concern for almost the entire country. And there's a lot of budgeting that happens for training and awareness creation throughout the country, especially for Northeast. There's a lot of budgeting that is done for training. And that is where I think legal institutions can get in. So you can send proposals for law enforcement agencies, training, etc. So that's one issue. Second, as I said, this is one law, unfortunately or fortunately, is such that the law came in 2000 and even now 2020, we're talking about training. And not underestimating what we're doing, but then this is an indication of the fact that this is the issue. We need to just keep on training so that there's a continuous updation of the changed technological requirements, needs, etc., which the law enforcement agency should be well aware of through the training that they're exposed to and all. So therefore, it's fine to continuously learn and apply it in the field. At the same time, I think it's a responsibility of all of us. So we as youngsters also should try to explore into these fields. So take up practice in this field, take up a consultation in this field. So that's how you can contribute to the developing arena, so developing field. So therefore, I think it's fine. And as I said, there's a lot government is also doing. And throughout the country, they've been funding, and there's a more budgetary allocations done only for Northeast. So police academies, judicial academies, law colleges like yours and all should make use of those training facilities that they provide.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, now we'll take up questions from the faculty members. I'll request our faculty members, NAF Law College, to put forward their questions, if any, to our learned resource person.
Yes, good morning.
Faculty members, NAF Law College, are requested.
Yes, good afternoon. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon, ma'am. Myself, Farheen Warsi, Assistant Professor of NEF Law College. Firstly, I welcome you, ma'am, on our platform. This is our pleasure to hear from you, ma'am. Ma'am, I teach IT law to my final year students, and my usually it's not a question, but I have a doubt on it. Because being a teacher, I'm also a learner, and I'm very pleasure to hear from you. I have learned a lot from you today, ma'am. My simple doubt is that what is the role of computer forensic in cyber security? Because we all know about the 4th and 5th Amendment. So, ma'am, can you throw some light on that issue on cyber forensic in cyber security?
Okay. See, cyber forensics is nothing but application of science while collecting evidence, storing evidence, producing evidence before the court, etc. At all this stage, it is using this knowledge of that particular field of science. So, for example, if there is an allegation that I've misused my computer to commit a computer crime, so you need to come and collect the evidence from my computer. So how do you collect? You just don't open it and start downloading the entire file or folder from my system. If you do so, you're ending up like manipulating, destroying, or altering the evidence on my file, right? So instead of doing this, you have to use forensic procedure, and through that you collect the evidence. So basically, it's all about applying science while collecting the evidence, while storing, and while even producing the evidence before the court. Most importantly, while collecting and analyzing the evidence. So therefore, I would just want to say that here we're talking about cyber security. How to ensure cyber security? So one way of ensuring cyber security, let's take industry as an example. They can have their own forensic teams who can just see if there are any cyber attacks, if there are any traces of cyber attacks by using forensic technology. So to industry, we can cater in this way. For the entire state, these expertise is required for us to maintain security of our devices, etc. That the government relies on or uses for e-governance or commercial activity. So therefore, forensics is more about collecting evidence, storing evidence, analyzing evidence. But industries do that when they suspect some cyber threat attacks in their system, in their industry. And therefore, what we see is that today in a lot of industries, you have forensic experts who are trying to contribute to cyber technology in this. So suppose there's an attempt to hack that has happened. So at least try to know from where the attack has happened, where the system is vulnerable by using forensic methods.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your beautiful answer. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Any other faculty member would like to put forward their questions, queries, or anything, or views?
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Yes.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Shruti Hazarika, Assistant Professor of NEF Law College. I had a question for you. By the way, thank you so much for your amazing slide. We learned a lot from you today. My question is, do you think that the risk of cyber criminal attacks on big data database systems containing personal data of social media portal users growing?
Yes, definitely. It's something that we've been hearing across the country and all, right? Yes.
Yes.
What we today do is, as users, we keep sharing a lot of information on or through social media. One is sharing it on public domain. Yeah, otherwise also, sometimes maybe because of the way in which we use these accounts, maybe it's compromised with securities, etc. Or like through Facebook, often there are other links that we click on, etc. So one way or the other, we get exposed to a lot of cyber, threats, and of such a nature that our sensitive information, personal information, might get compromised. Yes, so it is possible, and that's in fact the reason why states are insisting for laws to which you regulate even social media platform. So if you've seen, that's the attempt that was done even in countries like US, UK, and all. And in fact, in US, they even made Facebook, CEO answer to certain queries that were put in their legislative assembly. So yes, So we do require them to be more responsible, the social media to be more responsible, so that they at least are answerable at times, if not all, if not at all the time. Like maybe sometimes it's just my negligence for which I can't blame Facebook. But then when they are handling our data, when they are like letting people get access to my data on their platform, through their platform, they're required to be answerable. So just to give you examples of the attempts the government of India has done. So with Shreya Singhal judgment coming up, the Supreme Court, apart from removing 66A, also said that when required, you can block access to internet service, or when you can block pages on internet. And when you're blocking access to these kind of contents, posts or pages online, you can seek for cooperation from social media, concerned social media. So they're obliged to, help the government in doing this. For example, if there is a child porn material, they're required to assist the government in blocking it. Similarly, if at all there is a surveillance that needs to be conducted, online surveillance, so that's when they'll have to share data. So on one hand, they're required to share personal data when law enforcement agencies required. On the other hand, they're also required to take care of cyber security of our personal data, etc. Because they're all intermediaries and they also fall under section 43A, which I was mentioning through the slide. 43A requires any companies that are possessing, transferring, transmitting, possessing, processing, transmitting, handling our personal data, which of course includes social media, and they're required to follow 43A guidelines. And 43A talks about do's and don'ts. They're required to have a grievance officer, whom I can approach if at all I feel my personal data is breached because of them. So that is another attempt that they've done. And now with personal data bill coming up, PDP bill coming up, there is more expectation of compliance from social media as well. So we'll have to just wait and see. So basically, as a social media, they're responsible for everything. Cybersecurity of the information that gets shared on their domain. Secondly, for preventing cyber attacks by way of assisting the government in their e-surveillance activities and blocking activities. And thirdly, any other manner in which the state expects them to help, subjected to a situation. So they're obliged to do so under sections like 69, 69 and 69B. In addition to this, just 3 days back, the Supreme Court of India has said, now this is a decision about whether you require 65B certificate or not. We'll not get into that since we did not discuss. But in the same decision, Supreme Court now says that these intermediaries are required to maintain data for a minimum period, so that when government needs, is supposed to hand it over to the government. So you can't say, no, I couldn't store it.